craze of LisaFrank has come and gone, with the company hitting its peak in the 1990s. However, as I went over in part 1 of this series, it wasn't always rainbows and unicorns as LisaFrank perceived. After LisaFrank decided to take her company back from her now ex-husband, James Green, and his sidekick, Rhonda Rowlett, who was the VP at the time, it started a litigious war. After all was said and done, there were a lot of pieces to pick up. There were plenty of scandals, and LisaFrank being accused of scamming people and even stealing another artist's work. Today, we will dive into the lawsuits, scandals, alleged scams, alleged art theft, and more. This is part 2 of the rise and fall of LisaFrank. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, my name is Monica. I like to post anti-MLMs, that's anti-multi-level marketing, anti-unethical business practices. I guess we can kind of start adding that into my intro, along with some true crime content here on this channel. So if any of that interests you, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I would love for you to stick around. In today's video, I am bringing you part 2 of my LisaFrank series. So with all that being said, just as a disclaimer, this video is for entertainment purposes only and just my opinions, along with just based on the research that I was able to do, the information that is readily available online and everything like that. But I do always encourage everyone to do their own research. In part 1, we went over the beginnings of LisaFrank along with the work environment at LisaFrank Incorporated and also the, I guess you could say, kind of demise of the brand, because it didn't really run the business into the ground, but LisaFrank has not hit the same peak that it has since the 1990s. In part 2, we're going to go over lawsuits, alleged scams, collabs, alleged art theft, and if LisaFrank was the reason that an influencer slash designer, I'm going to kind of reference this person as both of those because I do think that Studio Mucci is both of those. But did Studio Mucci actually get evicted from her apartment because of LisaFrank? That is something we're going to dive into today as well. Hey guys, Editing Monica here. So I just wanted to stop and say, for whatever reason in the video, I kept saying Studio Mucci. It's actually Studio Mucci, and I knew that, but I don't know why I was mispronouncing it in this entire video. So whenever I say Studio Mucci, I actually mean Studio Mucci. Now let's get back to the video. There were quite a number of lawsuits against LisaFrank, and I'll list a few of them now, but I'll also go over a few throughout the video. If you remember where we left off in part 1, LisaFrank and her now ex-husband James Green had a messy battle after Lisa won back her title as CEO of her own company. However, the litigious war that followed with her ex-husband was probably somewhat expected, but draining. The following lawsuits that I'm going to mention all came from the Jezebel article that I referenced a lot in part 1. LisaFrank versus James Green, September 2005. Lisa's initial suit against James was to get rid of him from the company, and this did go through a bunch of appeals as well. James Green versus LisaFrank, September 2005. Then, James decided he was going to counterclaim. James was trying to block a 1995 buy-sell agreement that gave Lisa the right to buy out James's shares in LisaFrank Incorporated should the couple ever divorce. I mean, I think that's pretty straightforward if you ask me, but I'm not a lawyer. However, he claimed that he created 400 original characters and themes with the exception of a handful. He also tried to petition to dissolve LisaFrank Incorporated. This was because he believed the way that Lisa was trying to take her company back was illegal. James wasn't successful with this petition, but it would take them 5 years to settle. Rhonda Rowlett versus LisaFrank Incorporated, March 2006. Yes, even James's alleged side chick, Rhonda Rowlett, sued LisaFrank Incorporated as well. She sued for $2 million plus damages because she claimed that she was often promised a severance should she retire or be fired by both Lisa and James. This went on for over 3 years before there was a sealed settlement. I know it's sealed, but I'd be so curious to know what they settled on, because you can't just say that you were promised a severance. There has to be some kind of documentation showing this. LisaFrank Incorporated versus James Green and Jerry Rowlett, April 2006. This was a third-party counterclaim. LisaFrank Incorporated alleged that Rhonda and James, along with Rhonda's husband Jerry Rowlett, stole 5 truckloads of company property and converted corporate funds for their personal use. There were also a bunch of other claims that were anywhere from James and Rhonda ruining a relationship with Wells Fargo that resulted in interest charges. Then there was Rhonda allegedly not paying the insurance premium for LisaFrank Incorporated, and this resulted in the plan's cancellation in September of 2005. Then again in 2005, Rowlett failed to transmit 401k funds withheld from employee paychecks to the plan administrator, resulting in penalties to LisaFrank Incorporated and jeopardizing the tax-exempt status of the plan for LisaFrank Incorporated and its employees. The list keeps going on about the things that were allegedly done wrong. James Green versus LisaFrank and LisaFrank Incorporated, August of 2006. This was James trying to get $16.7 million to repay a loan for a private jet he bought. I mean, if he bought it, how is that the responsibility of LisaFrank or LisaFrank Incorporated? James Green versus LisaFrank and LisaFrank Incorporated, March 2008. James once sued for $2.2 million, which he claimed was his share of the sale for the jet. Rich people problems, geez. Green Bean Investments LLC versus LisaFrank Incorporated, March 2008. James sued yet again and tried to take back LisaFrank headquarters. He stated this was because LisaFrank Incorporated had violated its lease with Green Bean Investments, which owned the property, and guess who happened to own 47.5% of Green Bean at the time? If you guessed James, then you were correct. Due to him owning this percentage of the company, he stated that it entitled him to re-enter and take possession of the property for LisaFrank Incorporated. However, guess who also owned 47.5% of Green Bean? LisaFrank herself, and the remaining 5% was owned by their two children, Hunter and Forrest, who were minors at the time. So with that being said, the lawsuit was dismissed. Jerry Rowlett versus LisaFrank Incorporated, November 2008. Remember when I talked about that third-party counterclaim where the Rowletts and James were accused of stealing company property for their own personal use? Well, Jerry, Rhonda's husband, sued LisaFrank Incorporated for punitive damages in regards to the allegations that he stole this company property. That suit was dismissed. James Green versus LisaFrank Incorporated, October 2009. I swear, James makes me want to choose violence because he once again sued LisaFrank Incorporated as a member of Green Bean Investments. This was him trying to have LisaFrank Incorporated evicted from its headquarters. As part of the lawsuit, James had asked his sons, who were 13 and 9 years old at the time, and owned 5% of the company, to give him consent to take action against LisaFrank Incorporated. Thankfully, the two children did not provide that consent, and James was unsuccessful with the eviction. What kind of despicable person does it take to use your own children to take down your ex-wife's company? I just cannot imagine my husband trying to get our future child to give him consent to kick me out of my own headquarters. I don't know how petty Lisa was, so maybe all of this was warranted in a way, but using your children is just disgusting. I understand they were involved because they owned 5% of the company, but seriously, this really pissed me off. Getting your children involved in your messy divorce is the scummiest of the scum. In addition to all of these lawsuits, both Lisa and James spent so many years bickering and fighting in the legal system over things as minuscule as things like family photographs. Just make copies of those photographs, for crying out loud. It's really not that hard. As stated in part 1, Lisa did have to downsize and she had to let go of a lot of her employees. In 2010, she had a licensing agreement with CSS Industries, a Delaware-based company. This agreement stated that CSS would manufacture and sell her products, but in 2012, Lisa filed a lawsuit against CSS because they failed to earn her the $2.8 million in royalties that they had promised. Something I forgot to mention in part 1 was about good old Jamesy boy. Apparently, he found Jesus. He was Jewish and converted to Christianity. James ended up selling religious merch. One of his shirts is actually $95 at the time of filming this. That's more than Brittany Dawn's merch. I didn't think it was possible to charge and most likely make more money than scammer Brittany Dawn off of religious merch. If you don't know much about Brittany Dawn, I've made 3 videos on her, which I'll leave linked below. I'm really sorry, I just hate when people use religion as a way to scam people, in my opinion. His website is jameschristianman.com, and it's still up and running. James's website also has his poetry, photography, and sculptures on it. A former employee named Justin said, quote, "James did not seem like he gave a fuck about God or anything like that. There was that South Park episode with Faith where Cartman started a Christian boy band just to take advantage of people. That's kind of what James's new business feels like," end quote. I'm not saying that someone can't find Jesus or mocking anyone who has been through some terrible times, whether that be their own doing or not, to in turn be able to make it out alive and find Jesus. I do believe people can change, but with people like James and Brittany Dawn, I'm going to side-eye and question their motives just a little bit, especially if they're selling merch off of it and retreats like Brittany does. Anyway, James started Salvation LLC just a few short months after leaving LisaFrank Incorporated. It might come as no surprise that Rhonda Rowlett became his VP. I can't help but question the motives of this company that James started so shortly after leaving LisaFrank Incorporated. They clearly didn't have the same kind of success as LisaFrank Incorporated. I mean, have any of you heard of it? Because I haven't, but I also don't practice Christianity, so maybe that might be why that I'm just not in that sphere, I guess you can say. Like I said earlier, I do think it's possible for people to change, and maybe James did find Jesus. The next topic I wanted to discuss was a situation with Studio Mucci, or otherwise known as Amina Mucciolo, and Tassel Fairy here on YouTube. LisaFrank did get called out by plenty of people. However, there is a video by Petty Page that gives a different perspective that I found interesting as well. I'll leave that video linked below because it's definitely an unpopular opinion, but I do think that we have to look at everything from different sides, and unpopular opinions are part of that. There were some things I did agree with Page on and some that I didn't. I'll go over my opinions too. But before I get ahead of myself, let's talk about what happened with Amina or Studio Mucci. I'll probably use those names interchangeably, but just know that they're the same person. Brands such as IKEA and Urban Outfitters have partnered with Studio Mucci on products, collaborations, and campaigns since launching Studio Mucci in 2011. Anyway, Amina was renting an apartment that she called Cloudland. She lived in this downtown LA apartment with her significant other, Salvatore, and their two dogs, Worf and Princess Leia. Her apartment did go viral once she started sharing photos of it, and while it's not how I would style my own place, I can appreciate the design, art, hard work, and I'm sure hours among hours that went into creating this space. I think she did a beautiful job with it, and it truly is a work of art, or was. One criticism I would have so far with this, though, is when you are renting, it's not your place, and unfortunately, depending on laws in your state, you can be evicted or a lease can be terminated. For example, my husband and I are currently renting, and we purposely have not done too much with the house besides little things like painting the walls because they were hideous when we moved in. But we have kept holes in the walls to a minimum. I've gotten really accustomed to using those command strips. But sadly, Studio Mucci didn't own this apartment, so when her landlord said they were evicting her and her family, of course, this would be devastating to anyone because no one wants to get evicted. What was weird was this eviction had come out of nowhere, it felt like. Quickly, Amina found out that there was going to be a LisaFrank pop-up collab with Hotels.com across the street, and it just so happens that the person who owned that building also owned her building, which is when Amina claimed that her eviction was due to the LisaFrank pop-up. But why would that even happen? If you look at photos of her apartment and LisaFrank's apartment side by side, the similarities in design are uncanny. There were a series of videos that Amina put on her YouTube, and in the one she did talk about how they've paid late multiple times in the past, but it was almost like an unwritten agreement with their landlord, and their landlord didn't have an issue with this until LisaFrank and the Hotels.com collab was happening in 2019. Allegedly, they used this as their way of evicting Amina and her family. The landlord told Amina that they needed to be out by August, right before the pop-up collab was supposed to happen, and the landlord refused to take her rent money. I haven't looked into the laws in that area, but if anyone knows, is that even legal for a landlord to refuse to take rent money? I'm sure depending on the lease agreement, there might be loopholes, or maybe it is legal. But before we get into all of that and the aftermath, let's start from the beginning. That wasn't the first time LisaFrank had heard of Studio Mucci, which is why there are suspicions that LisaFrank did steal Studio Mucci's design. According to this housebeautiful.com article, LisaFrank had actually had one-on-one correspondence and even shared Amina's photo on their social media. As you can see here, here is a series of DMs between LisaFrank and Studio Mucci, along with this post on their Facebook that says, Studio Mucci has the right idea. Let's sleep in today in our hashtag LisaFrank gear. When Amina was interviewed and asked if she had heard about the Jezebel article that came out, and I've referenced a lot in this series, her response was, quote, I hadn't heard any of that negative stuff. I was just so flattered. I thought it was so cool that, she likes my work. It was something that felt very validating, end quote. If you take one look at Studio Mucci's Instagram, it's clear that of course she would love LisaFrank because of all the bright colors, rainbows, and just pure magic in her aesthetically pleasing feed. And I've fangirled before, I think a lot of us have, so I can definitely understand where she was coming from with that. Even though I wasn't as into LisaFrank when I was younger as other people were, I would fangirl if LisaFrank reached out to me via DMs or replied to an Insta story. That's awesome AF. If you remember from part 1, I did talk about how LisaFrank would purchase art pieces from indigenous communities and then sell them at a marked up price. So is this a pattern? I'm not saying LisaFrank isn't talented or that she isn't original. I just can't help but wonder if she did in fact steal the design for the LisaFrank pop-up hotel from Amina after seeing it online. Studio Mucci was known for Cloudland, and Cloudland even had its own Instagram. Something that Amina posted about during Blackout Tuesday in 2020 was this. I decided to call the hashtag LisaFrank brand out about their performative allyship on Instagram. Remember when LisaFrank totally ripped me off and stole my apartment design that was the source of my income for a hotel in my very same building, and then conspired with the 2 other corporations involved to silence me and have me thrown out on the street? Now they're on Instagram lying, LOL. Stop with the performative allyship. These brands will steal from Black creatives, mistreat and discriminate against our Black employees if they even have any, and then they show up to post a hashtag as if they actually give one single F. We don't need your empty gestures, we need your action. Hire Black people, donate to one of the many causes that need funding right now, use your massive platforms to speak up about racial injustices and amplify Black voices in a meaningful way. And to add LisaFrank specifically, if you really want to show us that hashtag Black Lives Matter to you, start by paying me for my work that you stole and profited from and all of the loss of income that followed because of it. Otherwise, shut the F up and stop trying to capitalize on Black suffering to stay relevant and appease your guilt. Put your money where your mouth is, Lisa, or stop talking. I would say that's pretty powerful, but then on Instagram, LisaFrank Incorporated decided that it was a good idea to post the following, I'm assuming in response to Amina, and because of this, their massive audience then decided to gaslight and attack Amina. To our fans, as all of you are, we are heartbroken over recent events and the level of racial injustice in this country. Out of respect for the importance of yesterday, we chose not to respond to an issue that arose on our page. While all of the country was spending time reflecting, learning, listening, and taking action during Blackout Tuesday, we were disappointed to hear an opportunistic individual taking that moment to focus attention on herself for her own personal benefit by repeating her false accusations that we have stolen artwork and designs from her. Over the past months, we have silently forgiven her need to deflect blame away from her own failures by perpetuating this false narrative. However, we owe it to our fans to speak out this one time to address these lies. During the fall of 2019, we participated in a 2-week hotel room pop-up. We did not design the hotel room or choose its location, but simply provided our artwork. Art that is completely original and dates back as far as the early 1980s. Additionally, the LisaFrank pop-up was in an entirely different building than where the eviction incident is alleged to have taken place. We had absolutely nothing to do with why her landlord evicted her from her apartment. We have never stolen designs. We take immense pride in our original artwork and creations that have brought our fans joy for decades. We adore our fans, and the goal when the company began remains the same today: to bring color, happiness, and imagination to the world. We sincerely hope that this brief distraction in no way will draw attention away from the very real stories and critical events happening in the world and the most crucial issues that our society faces today. Please support and love one another during this difficult time. Do I think that Amina and her family were evicted from their apartment because of the LisaFrank pop-up? That I don't know, because I've only heard Amina's side. I haven't heard the landlord's side of the story. Maybe there were issues, or maybe that unwritten agreement about them being able to pay rent late was never put in place, but I am leaning more towards Amina's side, especially after reading LisaFrank's horrible response on Instagram. The gaslighting in that was just, I don't even have words. At the same time though, with the buildings being owned by the same person, that raises the question of, was this just a way to be able to profit off of Cloudland, since they would have so much traffic coming to the LisaFrank pop-up? They could have rented it out as an Airbnb or even used it as a place for influencers to come and take photos. You can't deny that Cloudland is an influencer's dream photo spot if you're into that aesthetic. Amina did go to court and she had a GoFundMe set up. She eventually moved out of the apartment, and according to an Instagram post, she did paint the walls back to white so that the landlord couldn't monetize off of it, if that was in fact what they were planning on doing. I would have done the same thing. I've seen comments from when this was all happening, and some people were saying that Amina should be petty by painting the walls either white or black, because black would be a really hard color to paint over, and they shouldn't be able to monetize off of her work. I'm glad that she did paint the walls back white, because I agree, if they were looking to monetize off of her creation, and that's the only reason why they evicted her, then screw them. When Amina was interviewed about this situation, she said, quote, "It's just so frustrating to see something from your own imagination. Maybe people don't recognize every detail, but to see things from your own mind interpreted and covered with corporate branding is just so sad. It's all surreal. I can't really believe this is happening," end quote. However, this wasn't the only time that a brand would allegedly copy Amina. I know that this video is supposed to be strictly about LisaFrank, so I'll keep this one brief, but I did want to bring attention to this just because of how unethical this company was towards Amina. Back in summer of 2020, Amina called out MGA Entertainment over an LOL surprise doll. Amina found out about the doll that was called the Rainbow Raver once it came out in stores in July of 2019 after her fans sent her photos of it because they thought it was a collab that was done with her. When interviewed, Amina said, quote, "The first few times I saw it, I was kind of in shock. The first thing I noticed was the exact replica of a hairstyle I did to celebrate my 35th birthday. It was aqua with rainbow highlights, and it was shocking because the hairstyle was the result of my imagination and leftover hair I had from a previous style I wore. I didn't have a visual reference or anything, so it was disturbing to see something that came straight from my mind to be duplicated on a toy that I had no part in creating. Once I was done reeling from the hair, I noticed all of the other similarities," end quote. Even with what happened with LisaFrank, Amina decided to keep quiet about this for almost a year, until another MGA Entertainment doll brand, Bratz, posted something on social media about the Black Lives Matter movement. This is what Amina had to say about the LOL surprise doll. Quote, "This sort of thing happens to Black creatives more than you could possibly imagine, and we are tired. LOL surprise, you are not special or inclusive simply because you are keen to make money off of Black children and their families. If you really champion inclusivity and actually care about Black people, prove it by making this right," end quote. The CEO of MGA Entertainment, Isaac Larian, responded to Amina on Twitter. Isaac dirty deleted these tweets, but this is what he had to say. "You are a disgrace to Black people and the Black Lives Matter cause, liar and coward. You are a liar and an extortionist and fraud. Who's your so-called lawyer? Put his name and contact information here publicly now so we can contact him or her. Now we will no longer be nice and we will sue you for defamation, extortion, fraud, etc. Watch." After these tweets, Isaac Larian did attempt to backpedal by saying that he wrote these tweets out of frustration and that he didn't know Amina personally, but I'm sorry, for a CEO to respond with that kind of hostility and not taking a moment to really look into what's going on is so unprofessional. MGA Entertainment ended up tweeting this to show their timeline of the Rainbow Raver doll. I guess they thought this was their proof that they didn't copy her, but Amina stated she never received any kind of hard evidence showing the dates that they put in that graphic. Whether or not this doll was a straight up copy of Amina, the CEO's public tweets were absolutely disgusting and uncalled for. I'd be curious to know your thoughts on both of these situations if you have any, so leave them in the comment section below. Now we're going to move on to the Glamour Girls Kickstarter situation with LisaFrank. Jen from Jen Love, or formerly known as Jen Love's Reviews, even shared her 2 cents in a video when she found out about the LisaFrank and Orly collab recently.
I get that little twinge of, you still owe me money. If you did not know the backstory, just very quickly, LisaFrank collabed with a company called Glamour Dolls many years ago. A lot of us supported on the Kickstarter and never saw anything. They ended up selling the stuff on Hot Topic and people were getting it in Ipsy bags, but the people that actually backed the production of the collab got nothing in the mail. I think some of the highest backers may have gotten like a brush or a bronzer or a single shadow. But we were supposed to get like Trapper Keeper eyeshadow palettes and all kinds of cool stuff. I contributed $70, never got anything, tried to reach out to Kickstarter, and they were like, well, you know, it's our policy is you're using it at your own risk, and if you didn't get what you paid for, then that's on the brand. So yeah, LisaFrank collabed with Morphe a little while ago, and now LisaFrank is collabing with Orly nail polish.
There are plenty of testimonials out there about people who are still upset about this Kickstarter, rightfully so. I'm also only going to briefly go over what happened, but a channel here on YouTube, Truth Sleuth, did a full 2-part series about this, so if you're looking for the nitty-gritty information, I highly recommend watching those videos. I'll leave them linked below. So what exactly happened? Back in February of 2017, an indie brand out of Montclair, New Jersey, which is not far from where I lived actually, announced a Kickstarter campaign with LisaFrank Incorporated. The funding period was from February 16, 2017 to April 2nd, 2017. This Kickstarter made $370,000 with 5,935 backers. Each tier of the Kickstarter was obviously a different price, but each one had different products you would receive. The campaign was set to be finished by September 2017, and by this date, the backers weren't given what they were promised. By fall of 2017, some people who weren't backers of the Kickstarter received a bronzer or a brush in their Ipsy bags, which is odd because you would think that the people who backed the Kickstarter would be the first in line to get part of this collab. Well, come October, after backers still hadn't received anything they were promised, but all of a sudden, some of the products from their collab were showing up at Hot Topic. People who pledged $5 were promised a digital background, but Glamour Dolls changed their minds and said that these backers would receive an autographed vintage LisaFrank postcard. However, after a lot of people shared their photos, it wasn't a vintage postcard, nor was it actually autographed. It was just a photocopy of an autograph. The last update for the Kickstarter is from April of 2020. People are still commenting on it, asking for refunds at the time of filming this. In 2019, LisaFrank Incorporated issued this press release. To our LisaFrank fans, in June 2016, LisaFrank Incorporated granted a license to Glamour Dolls to allow them to put LisaFrank Incorporated's artwork on a line of cosmetic products developed and manufactured by Glamour Dolls. LisaFrank Incorporated has no financial interest other than the licensing of art to Glamour Dolls for its line of cosmetics. Glamour Dolls advised LisaFrank Incorporated that it planned to launch a Kickstarter campaign to advance its public relations and would offer the Kickstarter community a special line of limited edition cosmetics. LisaFrank Incorporated's involvement was limited to artwork, and it has no direct involvement in the production or distribution of any products made by Glamour Dolls. LisaFrank Incorporated learned that the backers of the Kickstarter campaign were complaining that they had not received the promised products from Glamour Dolls as identified on the Glamour Dolls Kickstarter website. LisaFrank Incorporated has worked hard over many years to build a brand that not only stands for quality and excellence, but that recognizes its devoted and wonderful fans. Our licenses are vetted to justice to our brand and respect to our fans. It therefore saddens us deeply that so many of our fans have been disappointed and not received product from Glamour Dolls. LisaFrank Incorporated has urged Glamour Dolls for several months to step up and offer a solution to the Kickstarter backers and supports a timely resolution of this issue. LisaFrank Incorporated will continue to stand behind our fans until this is resolved and is hopeful that Glamour Dolls will cooperate to achieve that goal. Well, in June of this year, 2021, Insider published an article talking about Glamour Dolls suing LisaFrank. Glamour Dolls is suing for fraud, defamation, breach of contract, and more. In this complaint that was filed by their attorneys on May 27, 2021, they state that LisaFrank Incorporated failed to deliver its side of the licensing agreement that the companies agreed on in 2016, and that LisaFrank shared lies about the situation with the press. Glamour Dolls is claiming that they paid LisaFrank Incorporated approximately $770,000 to date, but most people still have yet to receive their orders because LisaFrank Incorporated, quote, intentionally and blatantly stymied the process at every possible juncture, end quote. This was due to LisaFrank Incorporated allegedly refusing to provide artwork and timely approvals and disapproving sample products. Glamour Dolls stated that they were also forced to pay LisaFrank Incorporated royalties early on, even though the company had not even made the money in order to pay these royalties, and they are claiming this is so that LisaFrank could cancel its contract with the brand. Peter Georgodis, the co-founder of Glamour Dolls, said to Insider, quote, as the case moves forward and information is disclosed, backers and customers will get more of a complete picture of the circumstances around the Glamour Dolls collaboration with LisaFrank. Ultimately, we believe justice will be served and are excited to refocus on our mission of creating fun, vegan, cruelty-free products and experiences for customers all around the world, end quote. In November of 2020, there was a statement made by LisaFrank Incorporated to Insider that said, quote, after many months of pushing Glamour Dolls to live up to its contractual obligations and deliver products to our fans and retailers that ordered products, LisaFrank Incorporated reached the point of exasperation, terminated the agreement with Glamour Dolls, and contacted the federal government. To say we are disappointed by the events that transpired as a result of this license is an understatement, end quote. In the lawsuit against LisaFrank Incorporated, Glamour Dolls stated that the statement made by LisaFrank Incorporated labeled the brand as corrupt, untrustworthy, and incompetent, in addition to causing the company injury to its business reputation. Glamour Dolls is now seeking compensation for direct harm, punitive damages, and disgorgement of defendants' profits. It seems to me like there is a lot of back and forth and a lot of he said, she said type nonsense going on. These two companies have been bickering back and forth about this situation, and a lot of excuses have been made. I don't think that it reflects well on Glamour Dolls that there was a lack of updates, especially since people are still commenting on the Kickstarter, but their last update was in April of 2020. Since things are going to court, I'm sure certain things have to be kept confidential, but their attorneys should be able to help them with a statement. I'm not sure who I would side with here because we really don't know both sides. Each side, in my opinion, is hiding the truth and only trying to place the blame on each other. We only know bits and pieces, and certain things will probably be kept confidential in court, and who knows, maybe the settlement will be one of those types where it's a sealed settlement. With all of the back and forth, I think both companies are responsible for this. It seems like the behind the scenes was a mess, and both companies should have just put whatever their issues with one another were aside and figured out a way to address and provide what was promised to the customers who backed this Kickstarter. I just hope that the victims of this scam are compensated. As a tip for anyone who ever deals with this kind of thing, always report these types of things to the FTC and your state attorney general. It's a lot easier to report than you think, and once you have enough people reporting, it sets off alarm bells. I recently made a video about a reality TV couple who scammed so many people with their pyramid scheme, and it was due to them reporting this pyramid scheme to their state attorney general and the FTC that this couple is now being sued and being taken to court for this. I wanted to move on to talk about other collabs that LisaFrank has had with brands over the years. These aren't as scandalous, I guess we can say, as what I've already spoken about, but I think it's worth mentioning since it seems like LisaFrank Incorporated did try and make a comeback. As I spoke about in part 1, 90s nostalgia has become such a great marketing tactic for companies. I've fallen for it. I'm the one who went out and bought Reptar bars even though they weren't that tasty, and I bought myself a Tamagotchi recently. LisaFrank could have easily made a massive comeback with the 90s nostalgia trend. In my opinion, I do think the company tried because they did have some well-known collabs. The only difference is the timing of some of these collabs. For example, the Morphe and Orly one happened after the Kickstarter situation. Back in 2012, Urban Outfitters and LisaFrank announced a collab to bring back some of that LisaFrank a lot of us remember. Urban Outfitters was even able to interview LisaFrank herself, although under one condition that her face be covered. I went over that interview a little bit in part 1. Urban Outfitters and LisaFrank decided to bring back some of the vintage designs. This collab was all limited edition, and it varied from stationery to stickers, cookie jars, erasers, and some clothing. The stationery, stickers, and other school supplies, if you will, were actually decently priced for vintage items. In 2013, I guess some of the customers were not happy with the t-shirts line, style, and sizing, so they released this statement on Facebook. After reading through some of the comments underneath this post, it seems like the clothing line was catered to Urban Outfitters customers and their styling was very limited. There was another comment by someone who said, quote, "My concern with Urban Outfitters is their history of stealing designs from independent artists and using them without crediting or compensating the artist. I know they are a large company that can give you a certain amount of exposure, but watch out for them. I know LisaFrank started small, and I know she would have been upset if a company like Urban Outfitters ripped off her designs when she was just getting started," end quote. Which is a valid concern given all of the other scandals associated with LisaFrank, but I would beg to differ because LisaFrank did grow up pretty wealthy, and one can argue that Lisa has done this to others. If you remember from part 1, while we don't know the whole story, did she rip off the indigenous communities who she bought art from, then marked it up and resold it? We don't know if there was a contract, and if there was a contract with those communities, if it was an ethical one. Another collab was the one LisaFrank did with Reebok back in 2017. I'm not going to lie, I didn't know about this collab, but it's probably because they didn't actually sell them. From what I read, they made 2 pairs and then did a giveaway. In a press release, LisaFrank said, quote, "I've always been a sneaker girl, and I'm forever on the lookout for fun new styles. Sometimes I even make up my own sneakers, adding height to a flat pair of lace-ups. I used to paint my sneakers and everybody loved them," end quote. I'm sure whoever ended up with these sneakers was super excited. I am curious as to why they only made 2 pairs and did this as a giveaway though. Was it to create FOMO? And if you don't know what that means, it means fear of missing out. I feel like it kind of was, and to also at the same time create hype around both of the brands. But in my opinion, I really think they would have done well with a line of shoes, even if it were a limited run of shoes. They probably would have sold out really fast, and both brands would have made money and created a lot of hype around it, especially because we are in an age of social media and influencers where it could have been done really well. I mean, even Crocs were able to make a comeback. A collab that did sell on shelves was at Target. This also came out in 2017. You were able to buy pajamas for regular Target prices, and you can still purchase LisaFrank notebooks and the Morphe collab with LisaFrank on the Target website. LisaFrank seems to have been busy with collabs in 2017 because this was also the time of the Kickstarter campaign. So I'm starting to wonder if they just took on too much work all at one time, and because Glamour Dolls was an indie brand, not a big name brand like Reebok or Target, that the collab fell through the cracks. I'm sure we will learn more if the lawsuit between Glamour Dolls and LisaFrank Incorporated is going to be available to the public to know about. In November of 2020, Morphe announced that it was collabing with LisaFrank. This was to be released online in Morphe stores and other retailers. The collab included rainbow sponges, cheetah print brushes, and a LisaFrank version of Morphe's 35B palette, which was discontinued in 2018. In April of this year, 2021, the collection was relaunched, and it included 2 new products, which were lip crayon trios. Of course, some people were really excited about the collab, while others brought up that they still have not received refunds from the failed Kickstarter. I think that the failed Kickstarter will be brought up for a while with any LisaFrank collabs because people still haven't received refunds. Not to mention, a lot of people also have their own opinions about Morphe as a company as well. The final collab we'll be going over is the Orly Collab. This was announced in August of this year, 2021. Of course, the same thing that happened with Morphe happened with Orly. Some people were excited, others brought up the Kickstarter, and rightfully so. I mean, if I was scammed out of money, I'd be upset to see new collabs coming out too. With the Orly collab, it's exclusively being sold at Ulta, and they have nail polish along with nail decals. In my opinion, I actually think that the nail decals are super cute. I don't know if I'll support LisaFrank in any collabs after learning all of this, but I do love the nostalgia aspect of it. And LisaFrank was part of my childhood, and I'm not going to sit here and say that my childhood is ruined after researching for this series, because at the time it was bright, fun colors that sparked my imagination. But even though a small channel like myself doesn't matter to the LisaFrank brand, and it's not like I have much of a reach, I am a little disappointed. None of us are perfect, and we all have to make mistakes to be able to learn and grow from them. But some of these mistakes, I mean, they were pretty major mistakes. Like, they were pretty extreme. So that is the end of today's video, and that is the end of my LisaFrank series. Part 1 will be linked in the description box below, along with all of my sources and anything, other videos that I spoke about in this video. So that will all be linked below. And like I said, if you're looking for more thorough deep dives into some of the things that I spoke about, there's videos that Truth Sleuth made along with Kelita Rosita, and of course Petty Page, who gave her unpopular opinion about the eviction that happened. So I will leave all of that linked below. If you guys want some more LisaFrank content, highly recommend checking out all of the videos that I will leave linked below. And yeah, so you guys let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys next time. This is Monica reporting to you live from a highway. Bye!